The idea that nothingness could possess consciousness challenges both materialist and traditional spiritual frameworks. In modern science, a vacuum or empty space is typically defined as the absence of matter and energy. However, in quantum physics, even what appears to be empty is teeming with activity. Virtual particles appearing and disappearing, fluctuations in quantum fields, and the mysterious presence of dark energy. These scientific concepts open a philosophical and metaphysical doorway to an alternative interpretation. What if space, or even the void, has a form of awareness? In occult traditions, especially in esoteric branches of Hermeticism, Kabbalah, and certain Eastern mystic systems, the concept of the void is not truly empty. It is considered the origin point, the potential that gives rise to all form. In Kabbalistic thought, the term Ein represents the absolute nothingness that precedes even divine light. This nothingness is not dead or inert, but instead teems with creative potential. It is the purest state of existence before any differentiation or structure emerges. Similarly, in certain forms of Mahayana Buddhism, shunyata, or emptiness, is not seen as mere nihilism, but as a dynamic openness that allows all things to exist. Reinterpreting this with a modern occult lens, we may consider space, or nothingness, not as absence, but as a field of pure potential, rich in pre-phenomenal awareness. It is not conscious in a human or even biological sense, but perhaps closer to a form of proto-consciousness or field intelligence. Just as a magnetic field can exert force without having a mind, the will of space might operate through pattern, balance, or resonance. This implies that space itself might hold preferences, subtle tendencies toward harmony, structure, or feedback, making it possible to align oneself with its movement through certain techniques. The notion that humans can communicate with this spatial awareness or will is not new, but often misunderstood. Ritual magic, meditation, and trance states have long been interpreted as ways to contact spirits or invoke powers. But under a new interpretation, these practices might not call upon separate entities, but instead interact with the deeper informational structure of space itself. Rituals often involve symbols, geometric patterns, and specific sequences of movement or sound. These can be seen as ways to resonate with underlying patterns in the fabric of space, what some occultists describe as the astral or mental planes, but could just as easily be described in modern terms as morphogenetic fields or consciousness gradients. In this view, the symbols are not merely representations of meaning, but tools to tune the practitioner's internal state to align with larger, perhaps even universal processes. Similarly, meditation might be reinterpreted as an act of neural and psychic resonance with the field of awareness present in space. The process of emptying the mind is not simply a psychological detox, but a realignment of the personal field of consciousness with a more expansive spatial field. In this stillness, some practitioners report experiences of direct knowing, presence, or nonverbal insight, a kind of communication that bypasses language and imagery. Rather than visualizing deities or spirits, the practitioner might be tapping into the preferences or rhythms of space itself. The concept of will in this context needs a broader definition. It is not about intention in the human sense, but rather the tendency of a system to move toward complexity, balance, or transformation. A crystal forms in a specific pattern because of energetic constraints and environmental factors. Similarly, the will of space might express itself in the emergence of form, the flow of time, or the occurrence of synchronicities. Synchronicity, a term popularized by Carl Jung, can also be reinterpreted in this context. When the individual consciousness aligns with the will of space, understood as a field of organizing potential, meaningful coincidences may arise. These are not necessarily messages from an external intelligence, but may be natural outcomes of attunement to spatial rhythms. The appearance of these events feels significant, not because they were orchestrated by a godlike entity, but because the individual mind is now functioning in harmony with the subtle architecture of existence. This also sheds new light on ancient sites, such as temples, stone circles, or sacred geometrical structures. These are often interpreted as places to contact gods or spirits, but perhaps their true function is to amplify or resonate with certain spatial frequencies, making it easier for human consciousness to perceive or attune to the will of space. The orientation, materials, and geometry of these sites may not be arbitrary, but based on a deep intuitive or experiential understanding of how to enhance this resonance. When rituals are performed in these spaces, the practitioner may not be reaching outward to a divine force, but inward and downward into the underlying consciousness of the void. This leads to a paradox. The more one surrenders personal intention and ego, the more one aligns with this non-personal field of will, and the more effective the ritual becomes. In that moment, the individual becomes a conduit for something larger, not a god, but the silent intelligence of structure itself. Language, too, plays a role in this communion. Mantras, chants, and sacred words may not work because they are heard by a spirit, but because their vibratory patterns interact with both the practitioner's nervous system and the informational lattice of space. This is why repetition, rhythm, and tone are essential. They generate fields of resonance that stabilize intention and tune perception. It is a sonic architecture that prepares the human instrument for contact. This reinterpretation removes some of the supernatural connotations from traditional occult practice, while retaining its spiritual significance. One is not summoning invisible beings, but harmonizing with a field of awareness that is ever present, but mostly unnoticed. The practice becomes less about control and more about communion, a respectful, humble engagement with the intelligence embedded in the structure of reality. In this model, nothingness is not a vacuum, but a womb. It is the mother of all potential, and its will is not something imposed, but invited. The practitioner becomes a midwife to this creative potential, not through force, but through attunement, silence, and symbolic action. The veil between the self and the space begins to thin, not through effort, but through surrender. And in that quiet moment, the awareness within the void begins to stir, not as an answer, but as presence. If we accept the idea that space itself possesses a form of will or proto-consciousness, the next logical step is exploring how to interact with it intentionally. This interaction does not rely on language in the traditional sense, nor does it require belief in supernatural beings. Instead, it requires cultivating sensitivity to patterns, silence, and presence. These are the gateways to what could be considered a subtle dialogue with space, a communion, not a conversation. The first and most accessible method is meditation, especially forms that emphasize stillness and sensory withdrawal. By reducing mental noise and detaching from thought identification, the practitioner becomes more receptive to the ambient presence of space. This is not merely psychological relaxation, but a tuning process. Just as a musical instrument must be tuned to resonate with others, human consciousness must be emptied and balanced to resonate with the surrounding field. Certain types of deep meditation can induce what mystics describe as the void state, a perceptual experience where the boundaries of self dissolve and awareness appears to expand into an infinite field. In this state, some describe a deep peace, others a vibrant emptiness filled with subtle vibration or light. These descriptions align with a possible contact with the field awareness of space. The message is not delivered through words, but through feeling, pattern, and recognition, a kind of knowing without content. To enhance this sensitivity, practitioners may use rituals not as superstitious gestures, but as psychospatial tools. Lighting candles, drawing geometric figures, reciting chants, and creating intentional movements can serve to anchor attention and direct perception. These actions are symbolic, but not merely representational. They are constructive. They build an inner architecture that mirrors the silent structure of the void. In this way, rituals become less about causing something to happen and more about perceiving what is already present in space, but usually ignored. One advanced approach is sensory manipulation, adjusting light, sound, and vibration to create altered states. This is seen in sound baths, use of gongs or Tibetan singing bowls, and even modern approaches using binaural beats or low-frequency pulses. These techniques modulate brainwaves, opening access to deeper trance states. In such altered consciousness, practitioners report sensations of merging with the environment, experiencing space not as empty distance, but as an active presence. Some interpret this as the will of space acknowledging their attention, not as a being, but as a shift in the field itself, like wind responding to pressure. A key concept in engaging with space's will is non-interference. Rather than trying to impose human desires or projections, the practitioner learns to listen. This is a reversal of normal activity, which often involves trying to control outcomes. Here, control is surrendered. One enters into a receptive state, watching patterns unfold without judgment or expectation. In this state, guidance may come, not in the form of commands or visions, but as subtle impulses, feelings of rightness or hesitation, or even spontaneous insight. Such insights often arise during or after ritual and meditation, and they feel qualitatively different from normal thoughts. They carry a sense of deep coherence, like fitting into a larger whole. This has led some mystics to describe these experiences as messages from the void, though they are better understood as synchronizations between personal intention and spatial intelligence. It is not that space speaks, but that space responds, reflects, and participates in a co-creative process. This interaction can sometimes manifest externally through synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that feel charged with significance. After a deep ritual or meditative session, a person may encounter a symbol in the real world that mirrors their internal process. These events often feel like affirmations or confirmations, though they are subtle and resist analysis. Within this framework, synchronicity is not mere chance, but a feedback signal, evidence that the personal field has aligned, however briefly, with the broader intelligence of space. An important ethical dimension emerges here: intentionality and purity of purpose. If one approaches the will of space with manipulation or ego-driven goals, the connection weakens. The field of spatial intelligence seems to respond best to humility, curiosity, and reverence. This may explain why many traditions emphasize purification, both physical and mental, before rituals. It is not superstition, but a means of clarifying signal from noise. For those seeking to explore this further, dream work is another path. Dreams occur in a space that is both internal and external, psychic but influenced by unknown forces. Lucid dreaming and hypnagogic states can serve as portals for contact with deeper layers of spatial awareness. Symbols arising in dreams may be fragments of the spatial will, filtered through the subconscious. By recording and interpreting these symbols over time, one may begin to trace a kind of dialogue that transcends waking logic. Some practitioners create dedicated spaces for this work: altars, meditation rooms, or even open natural settings that have been prepared through intention and repeated practice. These locations become attuned to the practitioner's energy and can serve as energetic mirrors. Space is not passive, it remembers. Repeated engagement can create resonance points, locations where the veil feels thinner and where communication flows more easily. These sacred spaces become laboratories for exploring spatial will. Ultimately, the goal is not to master space, but to harmonize with it. In doing so, one begins to notice a shift in perception. Life feels less fragmented, and patterns become more visible. Decision-making aligns with flow. Creativity deepens. One begins to live in rhythm with something vaster than the self, not as subservience, but as participation in a shared unfolding. In the end, the question, does nothingness have consciousness, may not be answerable in a binary way. But through practice, one may come to experience a subtle presence within the silence, a kind of guiding stillness. Whether this is the will of space or the deeper layers of our own mind may not matter. What matters is the transformation that occurs, a movement from separation to connection, from noise to clarity, and from isolation to belonging. This reinterpretation of occult thought invites a new kind of mysticism, not based on superstition or dogma, but on direct experience, careful observation, and the courageous act of listening to what has no voice, yet speaks through everything.